After 11 years of marriage, my husband told me he wanted a divorce, because his mistress deserved a proper status. I signed the papers, smiled, and walked away, straight into dismantling the company I built for him, cutting off every deal and watching his little lover drain his accounts before vanishing. By the time I was done, he was bankrupt, abandoned, and haunting. The words didn't hit me all at once. They landed softly at first, like stray leaves falling onto still water. But the ripples came soon after. "Let's get a divorce," Ethan Cole said, his voice so even and calm you'd think he was asking me to pass him the salt. He didn't pause before delivering the final blow. "I want to give her a proper status. Her, Sabrina Wells." It was almost funny how her name had been floating like a bad perfume in my life for the past year. Subtle at first, then suffocating. She was always the girl from the cafe downstairs, or the one who brought the pastries. Always there but never addressed directly. And now she had graduated from coffee runs to becoming the reason my 11-year marriage was ending. I stared at him across the dining table we had bought together in our 3rd year of marriage. The same one I had polished while waiting for him to come home countless nights. Now the glossy surface between us was just a boundary between strangers. "You're serious?" I said, my voice more tired than surprised. "Yes," he replied, eyes not meeting mine. "It's better for both of us." Better. A word people love to use when they're about to do something selfish. The next day the weather mocked me. The sky was a flawless blue, the sunlight was just warm enough to kiss the skin, and the breeze was playful, teasing strands of hair across my face. A day that seemed built for romance, not endings. We walked into the civil affairs office side by side, but I kept a small space between us. I noticed how his shadow used to fall over mine, but today they barely touched. Inside, the staff member at the front desk glanced up, probably expecting us to say we were here to register a marriage. Ethan still had that put-together, husband-material look. Crisp shirt, pressed trousers, the faint scent of cologne. Me. My hair, though slightly tousled by the breeze, was still neatly pinned back. We didn't look like a couple about to legally end their life together. The woman behind the counter smiled politely. "Here to register?" "Sorry," I said, my voice steady. "We're here to file for divorce." Her smile faltered and she blinked. I could see her glance flicker between us, as if trying to match our calm tone with the reality of our words. She led us to a small consultation desk. The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at Ethan first. "Reason for divorce?" He said nothing. His lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tight. I knew that silence well. It was his way of making me carry the weight of ugly truths. "The relationship has broken down due to incompatibility in personalities," I said, offering the kind of sanitized reason people give when they don't want to bleed in public. We both knew it was a lie. Everyone in the room did. The truth was Messier. Ethan had found someone else. And not just found, he had wrapped his life around her, offering her every gesture of care that had long dried up between us. He picked her up from work. He visited her in the hospital when she sprained her ankle. He dressed her in designer brands she had no business affording. He sponsored a university performance just because she was in the dance troupe. He was her public guardian angel, while I had become invisible. When the clerk gently suggested we think it over, Ethan's voice cut through the air. "I'm very busy. Please hurry up." It was the coldness in his tone, not the words, that made my fingers tighten around my handbag. The processing sped up after that. About half an hour later, we each received the cooling-off period receipt, a paper that said we had 29 days to change our minds. We stepped outside, the sunlight blinding for a moment. Ethan turned to me suddenly. "Where are you going?" "I'll take you." I wanted to refuse, but he was already striding toward the parking lot. The car door opened and out of habit I reached for the passenger side. My fingers brushed the handle before I stopped. We weren't husband and wife anymore. The invisible privilege of that seat was gone. I walked to the back and slid in without a word. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror as he merged into traffic. He looked almost content. "Can you turn up the temperature?" I asked evenly. "I'm allergic to pollen and the cold makes it worse." He didn't respond verbally, just handed me a pack of tissues from the console. We had grown up together. I knew he remembered I wasn't allergic to anything. He was playing along because it was easier than talking. "Mr. Cole," I said finally, "please call me Lena Hart. Or just Lena." His brow twitched, but he said, All right, Lena. I'll tell both sets of parents about our divorce. Ethan had always had a way of taking charge of everything involving me, even when I didn't ask. When we were kids, he had been small and shy, bullied by other children. I was the loud one, the fearless one, declaring to our kindergarten class that Ethan is under my protection. Through middle and high school, he transformed. The scrawny boy became the campus heartthrob. I, still his friend, watched as girls trailed him in the hallways. But he never dated anyone. He only hovered around me, tutoring me in math, insisting we go to the same university. We did. And on our graduation day, he led me into the science museum, where the lights had been turned off except for a projection of the galaxy. He took my hand, palms sweaty, and said, "Lena, will you marry me? I swear on my life I'll treat you well forever." Forever apparently lasted 11 years. Now in the car, his voice was smooth but edged with mockery. "How will you explain this to your parents?" I stared at my phone, not looking up. "That's my business. I'll handle it myself." The song that suddenly played from the speakers was sweet and syrupy, the kind of pop ballad teenage girls obsessed over. His phone was connected to the car's Bluetooth. He answered the call. "Ethan, I'm so tired," Sabrina's voice cooed through the speakers. "I had classes all day and still have to work tonight. I'm starving." His eyes flicked to me in the mirror. When I didn't react, he smiled faintly. "I'll go buy your favorite seafood porridge and crab roe buns. Wait for me, okay?" I pointed to the intersection ahead. "You can drop me off here." The car barely slowed before I stepped out. He drove off without looking back, leaving me in the quiet hum of the street. Only then did I press a hand to my abdomen, the pain radiating through my left leg. My fingers were cold with sweat. I leaned against a lamppost until the worst of the dizziness passed. 2 months ago, Ethan had called me, frantic, saying he'd forgotten an important document. I'd rushed to bring it to him, only for a truck to lose control and slam into my car. The impact had shattered my leg. I had cried in that hospital bed, calling him over and over. His phone had been off. Later, I learned he had flown to Paris the same day, because Sabrina had once said she wanted to see French pigeons. He never came. The surgery, the rehab, the endless pain, I endured it without him. My best friend Maya Green stayed by my side. And in that quiet, bitter recovery, I decided I didn't want that man anymore. The man who could abandon me for a woman he barely knew. The man who could erase 11 years like they were nothing. The man who could make me feel invisible even while sitting right beside him. That day at the Civil Affairs office wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the first day I started planning what came next. The days after filing for divorce slipped by with a strange sort of clarity. I stopped checking my phone for Ethan's name. I stopped wondering what he was doing. And most importantly, I stopped caring whether he came home. But Maya didn't stop sending me updates. Sometimes it was a blurry photo of Ethan and Sabrina at a shopping mall. Sometimes it was a clip of them at a performance. Him in the audience, eyes fixed on her as though she were the only thing worth looking at. I never asked Maya for these. She just said, "You deserve to know how quickly he's parading her around." I told myself the images didn't hurt anymore. But that was a lie. It was like watching someone else live in the life I'd built, wearing it like a borrowed coat, parading it through the streets. Then came the evening Maya sent me the photo from that restaurant. The one I'd begged Ethan to go to months ago, the one he'd refused because he was too busy. In the picture, Sabrina sat across from him, laughing. The warm glow of the chandeliers made the wine in their glasses shimmer. Ethan was leaning forward, listening to her like every word was gold. The taste in my mouth turned metallic. I stood up from my dining table, my half-eaten meal forgotten. I barely made it to the bathroom before I was retching over the sink. It was that sudden wave of nausea that made me book the hospital appointment. The next morning, I was sitting across from a doctor in a crisp white coat, my blood test report in her hands. "Congratulations, Ms. Hart," she said, looking up with a gentle smile. "According to your test results, you're 13 weeks pregnant. That's about 3 months. Pregnant." The word seemed to hang in the air between us, suspended in some alternate reality. For years Ethan and I had tried, at first with excitement, later with quiet desperation, to have a child. Every negative test had chipped away at something inside me. We'd both been tested. There were no medical issues. The doctors had said it was unexplained infertility. Now, in the wake of everything, when the papers for our divorce were still warm, it happened. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I sat in silence for a moment, then straightened my shoulders. Please schedule the procedure for me. The doctor's pen paused mid-scribble. You're sure? Yes, I said. My voice didn't waver. Ethan had already handed his loyalty and his future to another woman. I wasn't about to give him a child to bind us together for life. When I stepped out of the consultation room, the corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant. The floor tiles gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I turned the corner and froze. Ethan was standing a few feet away. Next to him, Sabrina was clutching a folder against her chest. Her other hand rested protectively over her stomach. Her stomach. The swell was barely there, but it was enough. My eyes narrowed. Sabrina's first reaction was to shrink behind Ethan, as if I were a knife she had to shield herself from. Ethan's gaze sharpened instantly. Lena, what are you doing here? Before I could answer, he continued, let's part on good terms. Sabrina isn't well, and you following me like this could frighten her. Following him? The laugh that almost escaped my lips was bitter. I gestured toward the sign above the door I had just exited. Look carefully. This is the obstetrics and gynecology department. Could it be your little girlfriend is pregnant, Ethan? Don't forget, we're not divorced yet. I turned on my heel, ready to walk away. Lena, a voice called from behind me. I turned to see a tall man in a white coat approaching, Dr. Adrian Blake. His face lit up with genuine warmth. How's your leg? Has the rehabilitation gone well? He asked, ignoring Ethan completely. I smiled faintly. Thanks to you, Dr. Blake, I can basically walk normally now. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Rehabilitation? Weren't you just slightly grazed? Why would you need rehab? Of course. He had never asked for details, never visited, never noticed the way I sometimes still limped. His secretary had probably told him I'd been in an accident, and he'd decided for himself that it was nothing serious. The condition of my leg is none of your concern, I said coldly. Don't forget, we're already in the process of getting a divorce. His expression darkened, but before he could speak, Sabrina let out a tremulous sigh. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she looked at me. Lena, sister, she said softly. I've always wanted to say sorry to you. I've told Ethan to cherish you, to treat you well. It's all my fault things have turned out this way. Whether you want to hit me, scold me, or blame me, I'll accept it. Her voice was so syrupy it made my teeth ache. I tilted my head, studying her. First of all, I'm an only child. Secondly, this isn't a movie. No matter how well you act, you can only fool Ethan. And third, your acting really isn't that good. The faint smile on her lips faltered. She clutched her abdomen, looking up at Ethan with wide, wounded eyes. He immediately pulled her into his arms, wiping away non-existent tears. Lena, the divorce cooling off period lasts 29 days. You know my temper. Don't cause trouble. If things escalate, the only one humiliated will be you. The threat in his voice was as familiar as it was insulting. Dr. Blake watched silently, his expression unreadable. And in that moment I realized something. Ethan still thought he was in control. He thought I was the same woman who used to make excuses for him, to smooth over his mistakes, to keep the peace at any cost. He was wrong. This was only the second part of the story. And I was just getting started. The very same afternoon I called Dr. Blake's office and set the procedure date for the next morning. No hesitation. No second-guessing. If Ethan could plan a new life with Sabrina without looking back, then I could erase the last remaining thread that tied me to him. When I arrived at the hospital, Dr. Blake didn't lecture me. He simply looked me in the eyes and said, "You're certain about this, Lena?" Yes. The word felt like a locked door clicking shut. The procedure itself was a blur of sterile lights and muffled voices. I remember the cool touch of the oxygen mask, the brief pinch of the four. And then, nothing. When I woke, the ache in my abdomen was dull but constant. My body felt hollow in more ways than one. As the nurse wheeled me out, I thought I saw a familiar figure at the far end of the corridor, tall, broad-shouldered, standing too still to be a stranger. But I was too groggy to process it, and when I blinked, the space was empty. By the time I was home, I had already decided. Ethan Cole would never know. I didn't answer his calls. I didn't respond to his WeChat messages. Silence was my weapon now, and he had no idea how sharp it could be. For years, I had been the one chasing him, filling the silence, smoothing over arguments before they could turn into chasms. Now I was the one leaving those chasms wide and unbridgeable. 1 week later the silence broke, not on my end but at my front door. It was just past 11 when I heard the lock turn. Ethan stumbled in, reeking of whiskey. His shirt was half untucked, his tie loose. And clinging to his arm like an accessory was Sabrina Wells, her perfume thick enough to choke on. They were kissing, messy, unrestrained, as they bumped into the hallway wall, giggling like teenagers sneaking home past curfew. Unfortunately for them, I had been in my walk-in closet, changing into a dress for a late dinner with Maya. I stepped out, heels clicking against the hardwood. "Excuse me," I said, my tone perfectly neutral. "I need to get through. I have somewhere to be." The air froze. Ethan immediately dropped his arm from around Sabrina. "Go wait outside," he murmured to her, his voice low but urgent. Sabrina shot me a look, equal parts smug and venomous, before swaying toward the door, hips exaggerated as though she were on a runway. I ignored her entirely and reached for my handbag on the shelf. That's when I felt it, Ethan's presence directly behind me, the wall of his chest pressing between me and the cabinet. His arms bracketed me on both sides, trapping me in. Dressed like this, late at night. His voice was laced with something between accusation and mockery. "Are you going to meet some random man?" I turned my head just enough to glance at him. "I never thought the trash I threw away would still be in such high demand," he said coolly. "Yes," I replied, "and since we're speaking so plainly, I suppose that makes you the worn-out shoe that belongs in the garbage bin." The flicker of anger in his eyes was almost satisfying. Almost. I shoved at his chest. He didn't move. So I did what I'd been wanting to do for months. I slapped him hard. The sound cracked through the silence. "What do you mean by that?" I demanded. "Don't forget, even though we're in the cooling-off period, I can change my mind about the divorce at any time. Don't blame me later if your beloved sweetheart ends up being the other woman forever." For once he didn't have an immediate reply. The shock on his face was worth more than any apology he could have given me. I slipped past him, my heels echoing against the floor. In the living room, Sabrina was pretending to sip a glass of water, clearly waiting to pounce. "Lena, his sister," she said in a syrupy tone, her eyes scanning my dress. "You look so beautiful tonight. Do you have a date? I didn't expect you to move on so quickly." Her attempt at sweet poison barely reached my ears before I lifted the glass from her hand and tossed the lukewarm water into her face. She gasped, mascara starting to smudge. "Keep running your mouth," I told her evenly, "and washing it out with water will be the least of your worries." Right then my phone rang. The sound sliced cleanly through the tension. Without sparing them another glance, I answered. "Lena, I'm downstairs," a man's voice said, warm, deep, and unhurried. It was Damien Cross. I walked out without looking back. Through the glass lobby doors, I could see him leaning against his silver car, dressed in a black button-down, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. His gaze followed me as I approached. "You're sure about this?" he asked once I slid into the passenger seat, his eyes dark with a mix of curiosity and something softer. I fastened my seatbelt. "You know me, Damien. Once I've made a decision, I don't change it." His lips curved faintly. "Then I'll help you." The car eased into the night traffic, city lights blurring past the windows. Neither of us said much, but the silence between us wasn't the same as the one with Ethan. This one felt like possibility. Damien drove us to a place that had become almost a second home to me over the years. A high-end private dining club tucked away in one of the city's quieter districts. No nameplate on the outside, no flashy signs, just a discreet entrance guarded by a concierge who knew exactly which guests to welcome. When we stepped into the private room, the warm hum of voices wrapped around us. The table was already full. "Lena, you're late," one man called out with mock indignation. "You organized this gathering. You owe us a penalty drink." Another chimed in, "Exactly. We've been waiting for ages." Their teasing was affectionate. These were not just friends. They were my network, my capital, people I had invested in and who had invested in me. I smiled, slipped into my seat and without protest, downed the penalty drink they handed me. Looking around, I recognized every face. Some of them I'd met in middle or high school, others in my early career, and many more during Ethan's rise in the business world. Without exception, they were connected to him through me. In fact, they were more than acquaintances. Many were Ethan's clients. Some were former investors who had taken a chance on his fledgling gaming company. Others were current partners whose contracts kept his company afloat. And tonight I had invited every single one of them here for a reason. Once the wine glasses were refilled and the small talk had softened the edges of the room, I set mine down and spoke. Ethan and I are divorcing. The conversation halted mid-laughter. A couple of people froze with chopsticks halfway to their mouths. Only the soft music from the private room's speakers continued. A song I knew well. It reached the line. Once upon a time there was someone who loved you for a long time. Someone hurried to turn it off. What? One of the older men exclaimed. You've been together for so many years, and married for 11. How why? Clearly you've never heard of the 7-year itch, I said lightly, though the air around the table had grown taut. He cheated. Took the mistress to the Civil Affairs Bureau with him, no less. And she's pregnant. There was a chorus of muttered curses, gasps, and disbelieving headshakes. One of the women leaned forward. What are you going to do? I let my gaze travel around the table, catching every pair of eyes before I answered. Nothing dramatic. I just want to see how far Ethan can go on his own. Without me. Because the truth was simple. Everything he had now, the stability, the respect, the upward momentum, had roots in my efforts. They knew it. Every single person here knew it. When he started, it was just a game project he and his roommate made for fun in college. Caught the eye of a small gaming company, but he turned them down, thought he could do better on his own. Problem was, neither he nor his partners could negotiate their way through a lunch order, let alone a corporate contract. A few people chuckled knowingly. I told him to focus on development and I'd handle the rest. Distribution deals, marketing, PR, sponsorships. I used my own network to get the game onto multiple platforms. Within a year we were labeled the rising star of the internet industry. And after we got married, I handled every client relationship, every crisis, every media appearance. In return, he gave me a 16% stake in the company. I took a sip of my drink. That stake is going up for sale. The silence this time was different. Calculating. I'm not asking for charity, I added, but I am asking for respect. Ethan's company will no longer receive your business because of me. If you choose to stay, that's your decision. But I know every one of you has other options. One of the senior partners nodded slowly. You've done a lot for him. If you're out, I'm out. The agreement spread around the table like a ripple. I smiled, not sweetly but with quiet satisfaction. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say. In that moment I knew the clock had started ticking. Ethan just didn't hear it yet. This wasn't about shouting, fighting, or smashing his windows. This was about quietly removing the foundation beneath his empire. By the time he realized it was gone, the whole thing would already be collapsing. And I would be standing far enough away to watch it fall. The news that I was selling my shares traveled faster than I expected. Within 24 hours of the dinner, I received 3 serious offers. All from people who would make Ethan's life a lot more complicated. By the second night, my phone rang while I was finishing a glass of wine on my balcony. The number was familiar, but I let it ring twice before answering. Lena, Ethan's voice came through raw with fury. Who gave you the audacity to sell your shares without notifying me? I crossed one leg over the other, swirling the wine in my glass. Why would I notify you? I don't want anything to do with you anymore, so why would I help your company again? You... He stopped himself, but I could hear him breathing hard as if he was pacing. You can't just... I can... And I am. For a few moments, the only sound was the low hum of traffic in the distance. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its bite. If you want to sell, fine. But sell to me. Name your price. I smiled to myself. You're being generous. Let's just go by market price for the shares. As for marital assets, we'll stick to what we agreed. Savings, properties, and cars split 60-40 in my favor. Pause. Then, I don't have that much on hand right now. I set the wine glass down on the railing. That's your problem, not mine. He exhaled sharply. Here's the deal. Transfer the shares to me and you can keep all marital assets. I laughed, short and sharp. No way. Your 40% isn't enough to buy my shares. And you've spent quite a bit on that little bird of yours. I have the right to reclaim those funds. Lena, he warned, his voice low and dangerous, don't push your luck. Know your limits. I advise you to come up with a better offer, I said lightly, or I'll sell to someone else. Silence. Then through gritted teeth, fine. In addition to all the marital assets, I'll give you the 3 luxury apartments I owned before marriage, the ones in the city center. That should be enough. I let the moment stretch before replying. Thank you, Mr. Cole. I'll come to your office tomorrow to sign the contract. 2 mornings later, I returned home from my lawyer's office with the signed agreements tucked neatly in my bag. I'd barely stepped through the door when I saw him. Ethan was sitting on my sofa looking like he hadn't slept. His white shirt was wrinkled, hair disheveled, eyes darkened with something I couldn't read. What did you do to Sabrina this time? He demanded the moment I entered. I raised an eyebrow. What did I do? And besides, whatever I did, it has nothing to do with you now. Where were you all night last night? He shot back. You didn't come home. I set my bag down slowly, my patience fraying. Whether I come home or not is none of your business. He stood, his tone sharpening. This is my final warning, Lena. Don't let your friends harass Sabrina. My patience has its limits. But there was. I folded my arms. You mean Maya? She asked Sabrina to make her a coffee at the cafe, then critiqued it. That's not harassment. That's just Maya's daily routine. Ethan's jaw clenched. My patience also has its limits, I continued. This apartment was bought by me before marriage. It's my property. At 3 o'clock this afternoon I'll have someone change the locks. If you have anything here, pack it now. After that, anything left will be cleared out by the cleaning staff, and I doubt you'd want to know where it'll end up. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked into my bedroom, closed the door, and let the satisfying sound of the lock click into place. When I emerged an hour later, he was gone. For the first time in years, my apartment felt like mine again. Maya arrived at my apartment in her usual whirlwind, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, a grin that usually meant trouble written across her face. Lena, she said before even sitting down, I have the perfect plan for Friday night. I narrowed my eyes. A plan involving me or a plan involving me and Ethan? Because those are 2 very different levels of disaster. She plopped herself onto my sofa, tucking her legs under her. A little of both. There's going to be a reunion for his old university class. Guess where? I raised an eyebrow. Where? At the Glass Garden. Same place you're having your dinner with the investors on Friday. The Glass Garden was one of those places that never had to advertise. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the building, overlooking the city skyline. It was elegant without trying too hard, expensive without shouting about it. And it was where you went when you wanted people to notice you were there. I leaned back in my chair. And your point is? My point, she said, sipping her coffee, is that it would be a shame to waste the coincidence. We walk in, say hello to a few people and leave. Just a casual drop-in. Harmless. I gave her a look. When you say harmless, you mean strategic. He grinned. Exactly. Besides, he won't even be there. I already asked around. Of course she had. Maya treated recon like a professional sport. Fine, I said after a moment. But if he is there, I'm not playing your games. I walk in, say what I want, and walk out. That's my girl. She clinked her coffee cup against my water glass like we'd just sealed a deal. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp, cool air that makes the city feel alive. The streets were painted with the glow of headlights and the flicker of neon signs. I dressed with intention. A deep emerald dress that skimmed my figure without screaming for attention, paired with gold earrings that caught the light when I moved. My hair was swept up, clean and sharp, my makeup minimal but precise. Maya whistled when I stepped out of my bedroom. You're not going to just walk in. You're going to arrive. That's the idea, I said, slipping into my heels. We pulled up to the Glass Garden just before 7. The lobby smelled faintly of lilies, and the soft hum of a piano drifted from somewhere deeper inside. A hostess greeted us, her smile professional and practiced. I'm meeting someone in the private dining section, I said, giving her Damien's reservation name for later. She nodded and led us toward the private rooms. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses grew louder as we passed each one. When we reached the door marked Class of 2010 Reunion, Maya shot me a look. Ready? As I'll ever be. I pushed the door open and froze. Ethan was there. Tailored navy suit, perfectly knotted tie, that polished charm he'd always worn like armor. And on his arm, Sabrina Wells, in a dress that looked like it cost more than her entire monthly salary at the cafe. Her hair was in glossy curls, and she was leaning into him as though her spine couldn't support her without his presence. The moment her eyes met mine, her smile sharpened. Victory dripped from her expression. I stepped inside, Maya following close behind. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. During our university years, Ethan and I had been the couple everyone envied. The ones who were always together, who studied in the library until closing, who took the same electives just to have more time side by side. Professors used to mention us in speeches about shared vision and mutual support. And now the fairy tale had shattered, and the villain was standing right beside him, smiling as though she'd won the crown. A familiar voice broke the silence. Lena. It was Professor Hahn, my old advisor. His face lit up as he walked over. It's been so long. How are you? I smiled warmly. I'm well, Professor. And you? I'm fine. But what's going on with you and Ethan? He looked genuinely concerned. I didn't hesitate. He cheated. She's the one he cheated with. I divorced him after finding out. We're in the cooling-off period now. The room reacted instantly. Some people exchanged glances, others stared outright. The classmates who'd been gathered around Ethan just seconds earlier suddenly found reasons to drift away. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I turned back to Professor Hahn, my smile unwavering. It's good to see you, though. I'm actually just on my way to another engagement, but I wanted to stop by and say hello. I chatted briefly with a few others. Enough to be polite, but not enough to give Ethan a chance to regain control of the situation. When I finally moved toward the door, I could feel his eyes on me. I'd barely stepped into the hallway when a hand closed firmly around my arm. I turned slowly to find Ethan there, his expression stormy. Did you have something to do with the company's current problems? He asked, his voice low, accusing. I let out a soft laugh. Oh, have they already started taking action? His grip tightened slightly. Don't play games with me, Lena. Counting the cooling-off period, I said evenly. 29 days have passed. Tomorrow will be the 30th. The day after, we'll meet at the Civil Affairs Bureau at 10 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. I pulled my arm free, my heels clicking against the polished floor as I walked toward the next private room. Damian Cross was already there, seated at the head of the table. The moment he saw me, he stood, pulling out the chair beside him. You're late, he said with a half-smile. Sit. Eat something before the wine gets to you. Sliding into the seat, I felt the tension of the reunion dissolve into something steadier. The low murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, the quiet confidence of being surrounded by people who were on my side. This was my world now. Ethan Cole could keep his room full of polite smiles and whispered gossip. I was building something else entirely. The morning of the divorce was almost offensively beautiful. Clear skies, warm sun, the faintest breeze carrying the scent of early spring. It reminded me of the day we'd gotten our marriage certificate. Same Civil Affairs Bureau, same city, same weather. The symmetry might have been poetic if it wasn't so bitter. I arrived 5 minutes early. Ethan was already there, standing outside in a charcoal suit, looking every bit the respectable businessman. Beside him, Sabrina Wells was in a pale pink dress that made her look like she was auditioning for the role of demure fiancée. Her hand was hooked through his arm like she was afraid someone might rip him away from her. When she spotted me, her lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one she wore when she thought she'd already won. As I approached, I could hear her voice, too loud, too sweet. Ethan, we should just go inside and get our marriage license right after, don't you think? No point in waiting. I stopped in front of them, let my eyes travel from her polished curls to her smug smile, and slapped her. The sharp crack echoed in the morning air. Her eyes went wide, one hand flying to her cheek. You. Being the other woman is your choice, I said evenly. But don't assume everyone else is like you. Keep your little bird in check, Ethan, because I'm not one to show mercy. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. Without waiting for a reply, I walked past them and into the building. Inside, the process was quick. The cooling-off period had passed, the paperwork was in order, and with a few signatures, 11 years of marriage became a closed file in the Bureau's records. When I stepped outside again, Damian Cross was leaning casually against his car, sunglasses shielding his eyes from the sun. Ready? He asked. More than ready. Once I was in the passenger seat, I turned to him. It's time. Pull out completely. Every deal, every project, every connection tied to Ethan's company. Cut it. No more gradual pressure. I want the floor to drop out from under him. He didn't hesitate. Consider it done. The fall began quietly. 2 weeks later, industry news outlets reported that nearly the entire sales department of Ethan's company had resigned. Officially, it was due to irreconcilable differences with management. Unofficially, I knew exactly why. They had better offers waiting for them from companies that valued my recommendation. The replacements he scrambled to hire were bright enough on paper but had no understanding of the company's systems, clients, or internal dynamics. It would take them months to catch up, time Ethan didn't have. Contracts began to dissolve. Sponsorship deals evaporated. Clients I'd personally brought in for him shifted their business elsewhere. 3 weeks in, he was in full damage control mode. But damage control doesn't work when the fire is still spreading, and I was holding the matches. Then came the inevitable. Sabrina left. It wasn't just a quiet disappearance. She took a large sum of company funds with her, drained his personal accounts, and left behind nothing but a curt text message. Don't contact me again. Oh, and she'd aborted the baby she'd been flaunting to anyone who would listen. The day after, Ethan filed a police report. It wasn't hard for the authorities to track her down. Turns out, Sabrina was a career con artist, her cafe job, just one of many covers she used between marks. She had a criminal record that stretched across several cities. When she was sentenced to 20 years in prison, I couldn't help but note that Ethan was neither her first victim nor her last, but he had been the one who lost the most. The collapse of his company followed swiftly. The gaming platforms began pulling his titles, citing contract violations and unresolved legal issues. The investors who had once sung his praises withdrew their funds. Bankruptcy was declared less than 5 months after our divorce was finalized. And Ethan vanished. The last I heard, he'd spent the last of his money, $200,000, on a burial plot in the local cemetery. He'd erected a small headstone for our daughter, a child who had never been born. Rumor had it he visited the grave every day, talking to it as though it were real. His parents tried to set him up on blind dates, but every woman lost interest as soon as she learned why his marriage had ended. The man who once thought he was untouchable was now invisible. And I didn't look back. The first year after the divorce passed like the changing of seasons. Spring was for cutting away the last vines of connection to Ethan Cole. Summer was for rebuilding business, reputation, and the rhythm of a life I actually wanted. Autumn was for solidifying my place in the circles I'd chosen, no longer as Ethan's wife, but as Lena Hart in my own right. And winter was for Damien Cross. It started small, a dinner here, a weekend trip there. Damien never pressed, never tried to step into the space Ethan had left. He was careful, patient, letting me set the pace. One night in early December, we sat in his office after a long meeting. Snow tapped lightly at the windows, and the glow of the desk lamp softened the sharp lines of his face. You've been different lately, he said, pouring me a glass of wine. Different how? Lighter. Like you're finally done carrying something heavy. I swirled the wine, watching the deep red catch the light. Maybe I am. Then let me carry something for you now, he said simply. Not because I think you need saving, but because I want to be the one beside you. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a slow sip of wine and felt the warmth spread through me. He didn't push. That was the thing about Damien, he never pushed. By the second year, the city had stopped talking about Ethan's fall. Scandals burn fast and die faster, especially when the subject disappears from view. But occasionally his name still surfaced in whispers. I heard that he'd stopped speaking for long stretches, that his parents had moved out of their home just to avoid the constant pitying stares from neighbors. I heard he still went to that cemetery every day, standing over the stone that bore a name and date for a child that had never existed. There was something almost pitiful about it. Almost. But pity is a luxury I no longer gave to people who had burned me. In the 3rd year after the divorce, Damien asked me to dinner at the same rooftop restaurant where we'd celebrated our first joint business deal. The night air was cool, the city spread out below us in a sea of lights. Halfway through the meal, he pushed his chair back slightly, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lena, he said, his voice steady, I'm not here to replace anything you've lost. I'm here because I want to build something with you. Will you marry me? The city blurred behind him. All I saw was his face, lit with the quiet confidence I had come to trust. Yes, I said. We married in spring. It was grand, though I tried to argue for something smaller. Damien wouldn't hear of it. You're remarried, I teased him one night as we finalized the guest list. Aren't you afraid people will laugh at you for making it so extravagant? He shook his head, pulling me into his arms. You're remarried. This is my first. Let's do it like a first wedding. And if anyone laughs, they can laugh at me, not you. The morning of the ceremony, the air was warm, the sky a flawless blue. Flowers lined the aisle in shades of ivory and blush, and the scent of roses drifted over the seated guests. I walked toward Damien on the arm of my uncle, every step measured, every breath steady. I wore a gown that caught the sunlight with every movement, simple yet impossible to ignore. He smiled as if I were the only person in the world. It was during the reception that I thought I saw him. Out of the corner of my eye, near one of the far corners of the garden, a man stood apart from the crowd. Thin, far thinner than I remembered, and wearing a dark suit that hung a little too loosely on his frame. His hair was shorter, but his posture was unmistakable. In his hands was a bouquet of lilies and roses, almost identical to the one he had held when he proposed to me all those years ago under the galaxy projection in the University Museum. My breath caught, but when I turned fully, the corner was empty. Perhaps it was a trick of the light. Perhaps not. Either way, I didn't look for him again. As the evening deepened, I found myself on the dance floor, Damien's hand at my waist, the music a soft hum around us. Are you happy? He asked quietly. I looked up at him, the man who had stood by me without ever asking for anything in return, the man who had helped me dismantle the remnants of a life I no longer wanted, and said, yes. More than I thought I could be again. And I meant it. The thing about endings is that they always come disguised as beginnings. The day Ethan asked for a divorce, I thought I was losing everything. But the truth was, I was only clearing space for what came next. Some people write their stories around the people who hurt them. I'd written mine past them. And as I looked around at the life I'd built, the friends I'd kept, the man I'd chosen, I knew this was the real victory. Not the public humiliation, not the corporate collapse, not even the whispers of Ethan's ruin. It was this. Living a life so full that the past could only watch from the sidelines. The end.